Hi, my name's Alan, and I made 2 rolling pins out of black walnut, and it took me 2 weeks. And I'm gonna tell you why it took that long. So the material has been air drying for 23 years. It was cut and milled in 1998. It grew before that behind my childhood home, and it dried for, it's old enough to vote, right? It's old enough to buy itself a beer. So this wood is like very, very hard, very, very dense, very old, very hard to come by in this dimension, air dried in this part of the country for any reasonable price, right? So it is precious to me, both sentimentally because of its connection to my childhood, and economically because of its rarity and value. And there's one feature in particular in these 2 rolling pins that I am trying to capture, and which is the main culprit and primary obstacle for me in this journey, and that's the bark inclusion. You can see that I'm taping a dam around for the first resin pouring of many that I will have to do in order to bring this project to a conclusion. So I should say before we get too deep into this that I just hate epoxy resin. I hate this shit so much. And I can tell you why. We can count the ways here. It's a mess. It's a huge mess. You really shouldn't get it on your exposed skin. But each of the 2 parts is like honey, where it sticks to everything and it never dries, right? And it's sticky forever. And so you'll get you'll wear your gloves, but you'll touch something when you get your gloves on, and that will be contaminated forever, right? It's just an enormous cleanup. You can be really careful and still get it all over your shop by accident. It's just viscerally gross. Beyond being messy and gross, it's also hazmat, right? It's poison. It's 2 poisons that you mix together in order to make plastic. So before it's cured, it's dangerous to your health as you work with it, not just on your skin, but also breathing the fumes as it cures and before it cures. And after it's done curing, it's harmful to our planet and ecosystem. So it'd be one thing if the waste plastic were just one big hunk, but in my case, and in the case of a lot of woodworking that you can see on YouTube and that happens off YouTube, right? It's immediately converted into microplastics by sawing or turning or routing or sanding it. Like any surfacing or shaping at all just heaps more plastic dust onto our dying and burning world. So it's hard on your liver, it's hard on your planet, and it's hard on your conscience. So I don't like using it for those practical reasons. But it's another reason I don't like the material is how played out it is online, right? People on here especially spam it, and I've watched videos where people will just absolutely ruin what would be a beautiful piece of wood by filling the voids in it with like blue and orange sparkly plastic. It's just it yucks me out. And so I think it's used to excess by people either who don't have any taste or who have like SEO compromised creative intentions. And what it leads to is like samey video and shitty art objects, all while the creators of those are poisoning themselves and kicking Mother Nature in the teeth. And it's just, it's a bad scene, you know? So I only use it when it's absolutely necessary, and I only use it in a well-ventilated area and wearing the proper PPE, and I keep the amount as low as I can. And I had to invent a thing or two to keep the amount as low as possible, which I'll show later in this video. So this video is very much a downstream byproduct of the real project, which is the rolling pins themselves, right? and I have prioritized... I was always making both at once, right? I was always like making a video and making rolling pins at the same time, and if it ever came down to a dilemma between which one I focused on, it was always the physical objects themselves. That's why a lot of this is just done in like set it and forget it, sort of time lapse with no audio. That's why there are no soothing tool noises or ASMR. You're just stuck with my voice. While I always wanted to do both things well, making a piece of work and making video about making that work, I always gave the edge to making the work and not making the document. So that's because I see a lot of people, they end up making, when they make videos about making objects, I think they choose what type of object they want to make based on what kind of video it will be like to show the process of making it. And they end up making objects in service of videos and not the other way around. And I really didn't want to do that because making art is not a stunt. That's at least how I have justified my laziness as a videographer, and this is sort of a backdoor way of asking for your patience and forgiveness on that front. It's at this point that I started to first notice that the initial pour of epoxy had not reached the deepest parts of these bark inclusions or had come loose through the force of being turned, and that the surface I was hoping for deep within the wood to be stabilized with plastic was a dream that would not come true. I had to invent my way out of a problem here. I had a problem, which was how do I do secondary pours since the first pour failed, now that the surface is no longer flat but is round. And what I ended up coming up with was these little wax-based clay pinch pots to use as pools for pouring resin in a more targeted and more materially conservative way. The reason for them is the convex nature of the surface, right? For damming off areas for a resin pour, I'll usually use tape or some other like straight-sided material that's hard. But for this convex shape, having the freedom that clay affords to sort of build those organic curved shapes that I needed made that much, much easier than trying to build those dams out of tape. I've done that on curved surfaces before, and it really is a lot more trouble than this. The clay is like a wax-based material, and it's really great stuff. One worry that I had about it, though, was that it reacts to heat the same way that traditional ceramics clay reacts to moisture, and that more softens it, right? And since the reaction that is taking place inside each of these little ponds was exothermic, with the resin curing, I was worried it was going to melt my dams. It didn't end up happening. I think that's because the volume of resin was very low, which is part of the design for the whole thing, and part of the reason for using them in the first place, so it all worked out. The only thing I'd warn about is to do it earlier in your process than later. The wax did leave like a little grease stain on the wood. It was not deep, and all of that got turned off. But yeah, I wouldn't put it on anything that has finish on it or that you're going to put finish on. And plus, the clay sticks to a rough surface better than it does a smooth one. So it's a good technique. Little pinch pots, little heat gun, that's all you need. Here I am turning down and chasing these horrific divots I put into this piece using dull tools like a dullard. So I gotta chase it back down with all my abrasives, and I end up taking probably a quarter of an inch off the total diameter of this rolling pin, just chasing these mistakes down, just chasing these like pits and tear outs and stuff. And that quarter of an inch contained all of a large amount of the bark inclusion I was trying to capture. So it was a really, really costly mistake that resulted in less of the beauty feature I wanted to capture, less of the beautiful grain, and just a smaller rolling pin.
And so I made these mistakes early, and the second rolling pin is the beneficiary of these failures. You see that? There are voids and divots in this wood that you can see when you catch the light. And so this leads me into the next thing I had to invent. And I might be using the word invent a little liberally here. I had never seen this technique performed before, but I also didn't immediately go seeking online precedent for it. And the technique is to glaze the thing in a 2-part epoxy in its entirety while it's on the lathe. This dental hygienist pick work is all in preparation for that technique. To remove any dust from the pits I'm trying to fill. And so one problem with this technique is, there are 2 problems with it. One is that you are sanding off 99% of the resin that you apply, so you want to keep the amount low. I think I ended up making about a tablespoon of the stuff for this glazing. And the other factor, I should say, for this technique is that you got to leave your lathe spinning on low RPMs for the entire working time of the resin. And so the working time on this stuff is about an hour. So that's, that's your power bill. So this is not for everyone, and this is kind of an extreme case. And one of the lessons of this project is how much effort you can throw after perfection and chasing beauty. How out of hand you can allow it to get, and how otherwise, what qualifies as being wasteful. It's kind of a central question of mine in my creative work all the time. Is this folly? is putting this much effort into something so mundane as a rolling pin? Is that insane? Am I making an art object, or am I making a tool, right? And am I being a craftsperson or an artist here? And what do I give the edge to if it ever comes down to a dilemma? I always gave the edge to function over the form of the thing, and I always gave the edge to its usefulness and utility over the aesthetics. And in instances where it was necessary to go the extra mile, it was almost always in service of the function of the thing and not the aesthetics. Because in this case, the tool really needs to have a pristine, perfect surface in order to be safely usable in a kitchen. That is critical, because this thing is going to touch raw cookie dough. They're probably not cookies. Who rolls your cookies out? But like pie dough, right? Or pizza dough. And that's raw eggs. You can't be having divots and little crevices and crannies for raw egg and flour to get into and rot. It was all in service of the final sanitary cleanability of the surface, right? But what it led to was a lot of plastic dust, which I'm cleaning out of my bandsaw in this shot. And it's just filthy stuff. It sticks everywhere. Ugh, it's gross. It's like how Anakin Skywalker felt about sand. That's how I feel about epoxy resin dust. Back to the issue of form and function, and whether this is art or whether this is craftspersonship, right? I think always giving the edge to craft rather than art is how you grow as an artist, or how I have grown as an artist most. It's never been become more experimental and dial up your excessive impulses and fanciful notions, right? All of that must be built on a solid foundation of making the material do what you intend. And in my 2 years having wood be my focus, all of the pushing I've done has been in craft, and all of the confidence I've gained with the material and with the tools used to shape it have allowed me only recently to start even considering artsy concerns. And I think that a lot of, like almost all of the maturity that I've scraped together as an artist has been as a result of focusing on being a craftsperson first, which is, no one ever told me that. No one ever told me that that would be the case when I was sort of starting out, either in wood or in creativity in general. So this shot is illustrating like how deep a lot of these pockets are, thanks to the really shitty epoxy that I was using to fill these voids. It became necessary to glaze these. This is the second of the 2 rolling pins. And here's that glazing taking place. One of the nice things about glazing is that bubbles are not really a big concern because there's just not enough room for them to form in the piece, right, on that surface and in so small of a thing. So you just got to get your brush really deep in there and pop all those bubbles easily on the surface. And then it's just a matter of, in this case, I heated it to make it react quicker. And this one took 2 glazes, if I recall. And take that surface off, take it all the way down to the wood. This here toward the finishing line, there's one other thing I had to invent, which I guess I could talk about because it's going to be on camera here pretty soon, is like a finishing headstock gripper, which you'll see later is a piece of wood with silicone on the end of it, which takes the place of the headstock. It's a way that allows the final turning and the final stuff to be done on the lathe without annihilating work you've already done. But it's here in the process where I start to experience what I think of as like sort of like mothering anxiety about these pens, right? It's like the money shot period where you're applying the final coat of finish is approaching, and it's like sending a kid off to college in a way, like I have to say goodbye to these objects that I've become embarrassingly, like sentimentally attached to. And I think this is common for like a lot of creative people, that you invest a lot of love into these projects that you undertake and into the objects that are the focus of those projects. And when I do that, it becomes harder and harder for me over time, the longer the timeline is in the project, to let them go and call them finished, right? There's kind of a just 5 more minutes sort of mentality that I exhibit in the finishing as we get closer and closer to calling these things done, which I think is unhealthy and is counterproductive to finishing and making and fully making work, right, of any kind. I hope that I get better at that, right? It's one way that I want to mature as a creative person, is to be able to cut the cord more decisively on a project. In this case, chasing perfection and beauty is sort of the enemy of finishing things, and that's a pretty, like, that gets bandied about, the idea that the perfect is the enemy of the good enough, that's part of it, certainly. But another part of it is that I don't want to let these things go. There's always a period of depression that sets in after a big project is done, for me. And anyway, so that's just one of the tough parts for me. And I heard someone in a life drawing class I was in say that it never gets easier, but you get better. And I think that's broadly applicable to every art form or everything I've ever tried to improve at, It'll still feel like a lot to say goodbye to a long-term project like this, or 2 weeks is a long time to be working on like 2 pieces of wood, right? That it'll still feel like a lot, but I'll just get better at carrying that weight of saying goodbye. Maybe, I'm still figuring it out. But we are, in this case, drawing ever closer to the application of finish, which is always It's like saving the best bite of a meal for last, right? And it's a nice thing about working with wood that the last step is one of the most gratifying, and it leaves its taste in your mouth. You know, you don't leave the sanding isn't the taste that stays in your mouth after you are done with this meal. It's applying finish, and it's one of the things that motivates me to come back to it, is that the memory I make that stays with me of the project is not the arduous, painful shit, that's like frustrating and failure and dirty and everything that I've showed in this video up to this point, right? That I wanted to make a catalog of and make into a document. The thing that sticks with you is this last part where you're turning the dull surface into a shiny one, and really making the wood sing. So we can just enjoy these 4K shots of applying finish and forget about all the bullshit that led here, all the pouring and repouring of poison and the generation of hazardous waste, and just enjoy the wood coming to life and becoming all beautiful like this.